Pleasure to see you all, and I am grateful for your participation this evening. Want to thank in particular some of our partners in this endeavor, the folks from the Board of County Commissioners for Missoula County, I believe none of whom were able to be here this evening, but we forgive them because they helped pay for the study, so it's all in balance. We have some great information to convey to you all this evening, and in the wake of that information, I'm very interested in hearing from all of you about how we might proceed. I can tell you that this assessment was predicated on the notion that we may not know exactly who we're trying to serve as we work collectively as a community to serve a population we describe as homeless. That population represents lots of folks under lots of different circumstances, and my hope is that we have the resources in this community provided that we can work together to meet the needs of that pretty broad population. I have more hope today, frankly, than I've ever had in my career as mayor or as a public servant, that we can work together to end homelessness in our community. It's going to take work. It's going to take cooperation. I believe it will take some of us suppressing some long-held beliefs and quashing some of our own ideas about turf in an effort to make it all work, but I think we can get there. So without further ado, I'm happy to present this evening Maxine Jacobson, who did this study on behalf of the City of Missoula and our many partners in bringing this study to you. Maxine will tell you a little bit about what she found out. I think you'll find the information compelling and thought-provoking, and we'll also be joined by a pretty terrific panel of folks talking about the question before us this evening as well. So without further ado, it's my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce Dr. Jacobson.
So is this better? Okay. Yeah, I've got a bit of a little cold here, but let me know in the back there if you can't hear me and I'll speak up. But I was just saying, I hope you like green because the PowerPoint slides somehow are all just projecting green, although I actually did try to shoot some spring colors in there. But so we're just going to move along, and I've got 50 slides to get through in a relatively short period of time, and I hope that if I don't answer all your questions, that either afterwards you can take some time, look at the posters which represent the entire study summarized on the posters. But as the mayor said, you know, the reason for this assessment was to begin to identify what the needs were for homeless people and people who were experiencing housing instability here in Missoula County. And another piece of the assessment was to start to look at homeless people not as one group of people, but as many different people who experience homelessness in very different ways. So another piece of the assessment was to start to explore differences among groups of people who are homeless. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because research tells us these days that the stereotype that many of us have held for so long about homeless people is just that, a stereotype. So the other primary reason for the assessment was to inform a community planning process. So this is really the study was looked at as the very first step to take, not the last step. This is a second step as I see it, one where we begin to get the community involved in a conversation about homelessness and housing in Missoula. So, you know, this study started right near the end of October, and the big push in the very beginning was how to accomplish this study in a relatively short period of time with with not very many human people resources to accomplish it. And so certainly one of the things that Missoula is so good at is having people volunteer. And so there was an incredible volunteer recruitment that went on, and some 63 people went through a volunteer training, and some 43 people on the day that we actually administered the survey downtown on November 16th actually helped do the survey interviews with the people. And so this was a long process, though. The survey didn't come ready to use. The survey was a draft that had been in the process of being formulated by a group of business people and nonprofits here in Missoula for some time. When I got my hands on the study, it was time to do some revision and also pilot testing the study with some folks who know a lot about survey research, and also pilot testing the survey with a group of people who were experiencing homelessness, who could inform those questions perhaps far better than I could. So the survey consisted of, probably in total 375 distinct items that were asked. And so it was fairly complex, and open-ended and closed-ended questions were used, and it was administered not only in the community on November 16th and around the community, but it was also administered for that whole week at various agencies, nonprofit agencies in town. The survey applied certain screens, which I'm going to go over next, to give you an idea of how people were actually screened into what's called the sample, the group of people that responded to the survey. And then finally, the last piece on this slide is, so what do you do with all these surveys once you get them? And, it wasn't anything real sophisticated in terms of statistics. It was pretty basic, looking at counts and frequencies, and then looking at survey items and saying, do these things relate to one another? These, are females more likely to experience certain things than males? And so certain statistics were used to try to see if there were differences between groups of people. These are the screens that were used. In other words, what happened first when someone was interviewed is they were asked these questions by the interviewer. Have you already been interviewed? Are you living in temporary housing or emergency shelter, or living outside right now? Within the past 3 years, have you gone through periods where you've experienced or where you didn't have permanent housing? And are you willing to participate so that we could help Missoula build better services and inform a public process on how to do things better? So, these days in the literature about homelessness, what we've been seeing perhaps for the past 15 years or so is moving away from this research that stereotypes people and does research, and this is one of the stereotypes on what's often called, the Skid Row homeless. And that, as you can see on this slide, really is typical of perhaps 11% of the homeless population. And in the research literature, I'm not exactly fond of these terms, but they're called the chronically homeless. And then what we see, though, since probably the last 15 years, is more and more people fitting this other category, which is the top category that you see, transitionally homeless, which makes up about 80% of the homeless people, meaning that these are folks that have experienced far fewer episodes of homelessness. They're younger folks. I think what we're seeing in the study that was just completed here, that many of them are families with children, that they're least likely of all the homeless people to have a whole host of mental health or substance abuse, major medical issues. And then there's the middle category, people who go in and out of homelessness for a variety of reasons. So in the study, another key issue, and the slide over here called Key Comparison Group Findings points out some of the interesting findings that came from looking at 7 different comparison groups, comparing men and women, comparing families with people who not families, but 1 or 2 parent families with folks who were living alone, and trying to see if there were any differences, and making the assumption that if there are differences, then there may be differences in what people need for services. And so we could be better fine-tuning this to give people more of what they need. So like any research study, they all have their limitations. There's probably a longer list than I've written here, but these are probably the biggest limitations of this study. And number one is that when the volunteers went out and interviewed people, they interviewed people who were there, who were around the downtown core, who were eating lunch at the Poverello, who were standing outside of Missoula 316, who were camped out on one of the trails. And so if someone said, yes, I'm willing to be in the study, give you information, talk to you, then they were included, and that's all it took, other than going through the screens. And so participation was voluntary, and when participation is voluntary, your whole study, the 240 people, are people who said they would agree. We don't know if people who didn't agree would have looked really different. So that's a shortcoming. And the middle shortcoming is probably the most major shortcoming, and one we should always pay attention to when we talk about findings from any study, especially a study where we've gone and talked to people who we could find, is that we can't really generalize what I'm going to be presenting to you here today to say that it's about all the homeless people here in Missoula, that it's all about the people who have unstable housing situations, because it's about a sample of 240 people. And so although we can't generalize, this, in my opinion, was still a landmark effort, and there are some things that came out of this study that match, interestingly enough, with some national statistics on homelessness. I don't know if that was pure luck or what, but we'll just move along. It is what it is, I guess. People who volunteered spread out everywhere to interview people who were homeless and or had been homeless at some period during the last 3 years. And so what you see here is the site where folks were interviewed the most was at the Poverello. And I have to put a context around that. It was a day much like today, only it wasn't snow, it was rain. It drove people inside, away from the camping places, and so we weren't going to try to do it again the next week. So we were stuck with the weather conditions, and so the Poverello, we went to every meal at the Poverello to get people, because they were all getting out of the rain. We went to the library, etc. So that gives you an idea of how many people were interviewed where. And then this is, what some of the demographics are of the people that were included in the study. 240 people, and what you see on this slide is that 2/3 of them were male and 1/3 were female. That by age, what you're seeing here on this slide is that you see the peaks here in between 36 and 55 years old. But the average age was somewhere, I might not have this exactly right, you can read it in the report, was between 41 and 43 years old. So the average age is in the 40s, right, early 40s. And then this is, by education level. And this, I think, is pretty important, especially if, for example, if you add up this, and this, you get somewhere around 50% or so of this sample had at least some college education, at least some college. And that also includes some with bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees. And how I've been seeing this in other research and in my own research is that increasingly what we're seeing in quote-unquote poverty kinds of research is more and more people with higher educations. Now this is about who in the sample had served in the military and who had not. And you see the 21% here, and this is one of the numbers that matches the national statistics. 21% in the nation, there are between somewhere 20 and 23% of people who are homeless who have served in the U.S. military. And then the thing that's important to recognize with a slide like this and that statistic is that in total across the United States, 8% of people have served in the military. So what one sees is an overrepresentation of people in the military who are homeless. Whoop. Okay, and you know, this is also interesting in that this was a question that folks could answer. They could check all that applies. So it's probably, when you look at the percentages there, it's not all going to add up to 100. But what's remarkable about it is that, you know, 76.3% are white, and then 22.5% of the people that were interviewed were American Indian. And again, this is, I think, another slide that really calls us to attention, because in Montana, I think the statistics are somewhere around 6.7% of our population are American Indian, and in Missoula County, and I hope I have this right, it's 2.8%. So what we see here in the homeless population is also an overrepresentation of American Indian people. And again, I think American Indian people in poverty in general. So current family situation, as you see, you know, 67% of the people that were interviewed were living alone. And then if you combine, for example, one-parent families and two-parent families, you have almost 22% of the sample were families with children, and then 11.4% were couples living together as couples without children. Excuse me. Whoop, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let me just go to the next. And this is how long have people lived in Missoula? How long have they actually been here? I think another thing that's remarkable was that as you start to add up the percentages from even 3 years all the way to 21 years plus, that you start to see that, you know, okay, 35% of the people interviewed were here for less than a year, but everybody else, which is 65%, were here for 1 year all the way up to 21 years. And we have just a large number of people who've been here a long time, 6 years all the way up through 21 and over. And then total monthly income ranged from $0 all the way up to $2,500 a month. And the average of what people made was $450, and the median, which is half above and half below, was $480. So even though it ranges all the way up to $2,500, what in research we would call those folks very much outliers. There aren't very many, mostly around $450, $480. This next section gets into describing some of the past and current housing circumstances that the people who were interviewed had lived through and were currently living through. And so when folks were interviewed, this is where they were living. So at that time, 57 people from the Poverello who were actually staying there in the shelter were interviewed. And you can see, I'm not going to go down through the whole list with you, but that, you know, the second largest group of people were actually living outdoors, camping or in tents. Although I should say more broadly outdoors, if we wanted to add that up, we'd be looking at camping and then in cars or other vehicles and then downtown outside, which makes up a larger percentage of people outside. And then just to sort of get a sense of, you know, how often are people moving in the span of a month? And those of us who have done that who've moved many times, even in the span of a few months, know that it's extremely unsettling. And so what we see here is that folks were moving around quite a bit in a period of 30 days, that it wasn't like even in homelessness they had a stable, that even sounds weird, I mean that's an oxymoron, that that they were in one place, so that's probably the better thing to say. And then current housing status, close to 15% of the sample were permanently housed, but they might have been permanently housed a week or a month. They had been homeless during a 3-year period. And then 85% were living in shelters or outdoors or in campers or with friends or motels. Length of time people were homeless in one stretch. You see here that from 0 to 11 months, 35% of the people had been homeless that time interval. And then as you move forward here in time, you see that there were people that had been homeless for a long period of time. Some, not as many. And then times homeless, and this is another way of starting to look at, those different patterns of homelessness, is how many times in the past 3 years are people moving in and out of homelessness, moving in and out, for example, of employment, moving in and out of a community. And so what this one points out is that 50% of at least this sample had been moved in and out of homelessness 1 to 2 times in a 3-year span, but many had many times of homelessness. And as you look at the last figure there, 5 to continuous, you see that a third of the sample had been homeless frequently and or continuously over a 3-year period. And I think, excuse me, this is also, I think, of note, is that, we often assume that people who are homeless are moving quickly in and out of a community. Again, I think a lot of that fits stereotypes that we have. And with the study, what we found was, 44%, their last permanent housing was in Missoula. In other words, they were permanently housed and lost permanent housing while they were here. And then 37% were last permanently housed in another state. And pretty much there was almost like a geographical dividing point there, where those folks from another state were primarily from the center of the United States west. I'm not sure why. And then in Montana, we saw the same sort of geographic divide, where most of the people that were from other parts in Montana were from somewhere from central Montana west. Again, it could have just been indicative of this particular sample. And then the main reasons that people indicated that they were homeless, as you can see here, housing and economics was key. And that had to do with lost wages, having very poor job opportunities, eviction, high rents. So those were the key issues. And then the second issue had to do with health and mental health and disability and other kinds of more detrimental illnesses, longer-term illnesses that could have cost too much for any one person to bear, and had folks lost their housing. And then as you move around the pie chart, you see that there's a bunch of miscellaneous examples, but also that family and friends had to do with domestic violence, arguments and conflicts with family, etc. And then, for those people who weren't living and hadn't lost their permanent housing here in Missoula, why did folks move to Missoula? And primarily what people were saying is because either have family here, so I'm coming home, or I have friends here. And then other adverse situations drove people into, or were why people moved here. But I think the other remarkable thing on this list is that you see services offered as the fourth thing on the list, not the primary issue that why people moved to Missoula, that it was more about, relationships, I'd have to say. And this other slide here is just a sort of composites of some of what people said. I know some people here, and I know the city well. I've lived here off and on, for 16 years, or since I was 16 years old, and others mentioning, about family breakup and then the power getting shut off, and then also about services, too, to low-income families and fleeing domestic violence situations. And people were asked, is Missoula a good place to live? And there were very few people who were ambivalent about that. Most everybody, as you can see, said, yeah, Missoula is a great place to live. And those who were ambivalent, it had more to do with, this is a great community, but it's hard to find jobs, or the housing is too expensive. So it was said with, yeah, I really like it, but there are these other things that are just a struggle. And folks were asked, this is like the results of an open-ended question where they said, okay, so it's a good place. Why do you think it's a good place? And primarily what people were indicating there is that it's about this community. It's about the attributes of this community, that it is a supportive community, that there are a lot of things happening here, that people are good people, too. And that was the second piece there, too, about the people. And again, as you spin around that pie and you look at social services, again, it's not the thing that's foremost in people's minds about what's driving them to stay here in Missoula or why they think it's a good place, although that's an aspect of the pie. But again, it's more about these community cohesiveness, support, etc. And so this is another section of the survey that had to do with housing and other service use and barriers, etc. And the reason that these questions were asked about service use and barriers to service use is that it's a small step away from being able, it's a small step away from knowing what it is that people need to then trying to understand what keeps people from getting what they need. So people were asked, what do you see as some of the things that get in your way in terms of using services? What are the things that create opportunities to use services? So, and this particular slide points out service use intensity, for lack of a better word. Folks were asked, how many services have you used in a 12-month period? And what you see at the bottom of this chart are the times. Okay, so 46% of the people interviewed used anywhere from 2 to 5 different kinds of services over the course of a 12-month period. A third of the sample used anywhere from 6 to 10 discrete services. Okay, could be the food bank, could have been the Poverello or health partnership. And so when asked, well, which services do you use, these were compiled, and what we could get a sense of was, okay, what's being used the most? And what ends up happening, as you can see on this slide, our food and meal programs get used the most. And you'll see in a subsequent slide here that that's because they're the easiest to access, and people felt not, I'm not going to say good, but they felt they were treated humanely, respected, they kept their dignity while asking for something that is not easy to ask for most people, to ask for help. So what we see here is food and meal services were the most used services. Next was healthcare, and then housing and shelter services. And that's how it worked in order. And then are some services easier to use than others? And almost 66% said yes, some are. And when asked, what makes them easier to use, these were the major themes. And I've seen this in other research. So this is another place where this particular research, although we had our own convenience sample where this plays out in other research as well, where folks commented about, the easiest programs to use are the most informal. I almost looked at them as those were the services that have developed here in Missoula. And these are the services that are funded a lot by donors from Missoula, as opposed to federal programs or state agencies, which have a lot more paperwork. The eligibility requirements are different. When you go to the food bank, you don't get asked if you need food or to qualify for it. So that's what made some of these easier to use. Ease of access had to do with transportation as well, the location of the service. If you have to take a bus to it, could you walk to it? Could you not take a bus to it? And then some folks had been turned down for service. And what basically came out of that was that they were overqualified. Overqualified meaning that they couldn't meet the eligibility requirements, that they didn't have the proper identification. That was another issue. So those were some of the reasons that were given. And then, had folks ever chosen just not to even bother with services at all? And yes, there are, and this may be, sort of debunking another stereotype, but there are many people out there that do not want to use services. It's, if we just think about ourselves, about how difficult it is to ask for help in a culture where that makes you feel diminished. And folks chose not to. The primary reason, and I've seen this in other studies, was because somebody else needs it more than I do. That was the primary reason that folks chose not to use services. Somebody else is more needy. Somebody else could use this. I do not want to use up something that somebody else could use. And then other services needed, another open-ended question, and primarily what people were talking about there was the need to access housing assistance and health and mental health assistance. And this is interesting, where people, there was a comparison group finding about this that's interesting. Primarily people who aren't from Missoula, who've lived here a very short period of time, who are living outside, etc., primarily get to services through word of mouth, whereas people who are permanently housed here from Missoula seem to have ways of finding out through other service organizations how to access other services for themselves. And then this other section is about permanent housing and employment needs. And here, and this is another piece of this study that plays out across the United States in terms of the two primary pieces that are essential to finding permanent housing. And this replicates itself in other studies. And that is, the number one was affordable housing, and number two, jobs. Viable, sustainable jobs. So we see that repeatedly in the literature about homelessness. And then what could people afford to pay for rent? Those folks who were interested in permanent housing, not everybody was, but quite a few were. Anywhere from, of course, no ability to pay whatsoever up to $700. And I looked at the Missoula Realtors report for this last year and saw that a median price two-bedroom apartment here in Missoula costs $700. The median affordable rent that people could pay was $450. So there's a big disparity there. And then affording permanent housing, what would help people afford it? Again, ongoing rental assistance, first and last month's rent, a job or better paying job were the top things, and transportation, bus vouchers. So, and then the top 10 sources of people's income were Social Security, disability. I wanted to point this out too. You'll see there that 17.9% had a part-time job, And what I did was added up all the actual work that people were doing themselves. And when you look at part-time job, full-time job, odd jobs, crafts, recycling, that comes up to somewhere around 43% of this sample were actually out getting income either through a job or some other means to try to support themselves. And then, do you need help finding a job? And 50% said yes, of those who wanted a job. Some folks were unable to work because of disability or health reasons. And then what do you need to find and keep a job? And primarily here, education, job training, transportation, knowing what jobs are available. And the last question in the survey was, is there anything else you could tell us that would help inform a community planning process here to address the issue of homelessness and housing instability? And I've just clipped some quotes here that I think are just remarkable. Folks are saying here that we need more places for families to stay. The number of homeless families and number of shelters just don't add up. Build onto the POV. It's a great place, but it needs more dining space. And I thought this is an interesting perspective. Places like the POV are needed in every city. It takes the pressure off the judicial system. I mean, that's certainly one way to think about it, And then this was also, I thought, I think this one and a number of other direct quotes really got to the issue of, people aren't just really comfortable living off the dole. And so what we see here is people coming up with ideas about what could we do here. And this person, and this kind, I love our local food. I love all the agriculture here. And so I love this one. It said, we need an agricultural project like a homeless garden. That way we can work for the services. This would help to sustain the community, and we can feel better about ourselves by contributing. And then I'm just going to very quickly, because I think I've used up enough time here, very quickly say there are some key findings on that chart over there. And some of these have to do with, the second one, well, the first one I should just address, and then I think I'll let you, I've already sort of summarized the others, but I think part of what the study pointed out is that, probably like all communities across the United States right now, we have homeless people that grew up here, that were permanently housed here. I had, for lack of a better word, and not meant facetiously or demeaning, to say, these are people who were grown into homeless people here. So that, I think, is important to recognize. The next one, the whole idea is if we put more services into a community and we, in other words, build it. We hear this across the United States. It isn't just Missoula that talks about building it and they will come. It's everyone's fear, especially in a down economy, that that if we put in more services, more people will come to Missoula. Number one, we're a rural state, and that means historically that anybody that was struggling in a rural state moved to the cities, so that's one issue. But the build it and they will come, I think, what at least I say in the study is I think we've already built what it is that brings people here. And what we've got is this cohesive, supportive, attractive community. And that primarily is what brings people here. And second, it's who we are. It's the people here. And those are the key reasons. So I'm going to let you maybe look around later and or download the study off the city's website. And I think that's it for me, other than I'll leave this quote up because I think it's another one that sort of dispels a lot of myth about people who are homeless. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxine. That's plenty of food for thought, and we'll have a little more food for thought here as we ponder some of what this study tells us. We have a number of esteemed panelists here this evening, and I really appreciate you all taking your time, again, on a Tuesday evening to join us and share your thoughts around the notion of homeless needs and how we might address those needs. Before I introduce the panel, however, I would like to acknowledge a few other folks in the audience this evening. I saw Councilman John Wilkins here, as is Councilwoman Renee Mitchell. I'll introduce Councilman Weiner later. And seeking refuge, apparently, from the state capital, Helena, Montana, we have Representative Ellie Hill here and her bodyguard, Representative Patrick Noonan, all the way from just outside of Butte, America. Thank you both for being here this evening. Our panel this evening, ladies and gentlemen, pardon me, comprised of, we didn't turn the heat on in here this evening. I apologize for that, and it's causing my nose to run ever so slightly. We have our friend Susan Hay Patrick, a perennial do-gooder, who is also paid for doing good, which is a beautiful combination of events. Susan runs our United Way of Missoula County and does a fine job of that, and is a great person to bring community together. We also have from our friends at St. Patrick Hospital, oh thanks Ellie, Mary Hutton, who is busy there every day managing community benefits, and Mary has firsthand experience with the cost of homelessness, in particular on a charitable hospital in our community. Our friend Fred Van Valkenburg, serving admirably as Missoula County's attorney. Thanks for being here, Fred. Rod Austin directs operations at the Downtown Business Improvement District. Rod has tremendous experience downtown and is a great fan of what we do down here. Again, Councilman Weiner from Ward 1, who has a keen interest in issues of poverty and homelessness, and is very eager to help address the problems. Mary Jane Nealon, whose organization, Partnership Health Center, does fantastic work in our community, and she manages program development and the Partnership's Healthcare for the Homeless program. And last but not least, my friend and colleague, our Chief of Police, Mark Muir. And if I may, folks, ask you to offer some brief introductory remarks as we proceed this evening, and I will proceed in the order in which you sat. So, with that, Mary, if you'd be so kind as to start. And the technology behind those microphones, you press the button until you see a green light, and then you will be broadcast throughout the airwaves on MCAT.
Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. The comments and the numbers that I would share with you certainly don't represent our hospital partner across town, so just because that certainly is a piece of information that would be relative to the conversation later on. We, of course, are a downtown hospital, and so we are partners with many of you in it's on. Sorry. At St. Pat's in the last, in 2009, and I apologize, I'm trying currently to get the numbers for 2010, but for us, we actually counted the number of patients who identified as homeless, and again, we use the broad definition. Patients who either gave the Poverello as their address or 435 Ryman, or identified as I'm living, with a friend or other. And there were 514 of them in 2009. And in 2009, we contributed $3,028,359 in charity to those 514 patients. So from a commitment to healthcare justice, which is, as most of you know, is a very basic tenet of our mission, we are obviously looking at trying to make sure that we have justice and access for all, and that is work that is happening at both the state and the federal level, but we certainly are a partner with that. We know these are very vulnerable patients, and we are doing everything we can every day to help them beyond charity care. We also have a number of staff that actually work with homeless patients and help them file for disability, help them file for Medicaid and other medication assistance programs. So we do go beyond just typical case management. We certainly understand these are medically vulnerable patients when we must discharge them, and we certainly want to partner with others in our community to make sure we know that we're not a hostile. We know we must discharge them, and we also understand that if we're discharging, we would really love nothing better than to discharge them to a stable, safe home.
Thanks, John. I'm here tonight because I keep seeing my name in the paper that when in connection with this study that the mayor is, passing the torch to Councilman Weiner and me and handing this off. So I thought I better show up and see exactly what you had in mind.
You haven't knocked out yet?
Yeah. So I was thinking about, I asked Jenny Merriam when I came here, so, I'm not really sure what to say. And she said, well, talk about why you're here and what the study means to United Way. So I'm here in part because I keep seeing my name in the paper. But I think the study's key findings confirmed some of what we already know at United Way in Missoula County. And that is, as many of you know, the most troublesome, most visible, most resource-consuming, most problematic homeless people, the people who are downtown, are not emblematic of all homeless people in Missoula. And many of you know I'm very careful not to talk about the homeless, because when we make them monolithic, we forget that they're homeless, as this study shows, for a variety of different reasons. Some, of course, by their own hand, but many of them by the hand they were dealt. But behind the study, I think our interest is in what sparked the study, a broad recognition in Missoula that we have a problem, and we better start addressing it. It's affecting our quality of life. It's not somebody else's problem to solve. It's the responsibility of all of us, the business community, the faith community, the nonprofit community, and the public sector. And I think that, as the gentleman who was here from the Department of Housing and Urban Development not long ago said, homelessness in a community is usually a problem of hopelessness. Hopelessness on the part of the people who are homeless, and hopelessness on the part of communities that think there is no solution. And I think that's not a very Missoula sentiment. I think that we have shown in this community that when we put our mind to solving something, we can do a pretty darn good job of it. United Ways nationwide have been involved in bringing together people and resources to craft long-range plans to address homelessness on a comprehensive basis. And for the last 80 years, our United Way Missoula County, has been building relationships and strengthening them with the stakeholders that I talked about, the business community, the public sector, the private sector, nonprofit community, donors. And I think we also have a pretty good track record of holding our funded programs accountable for achieving results through a rigorous application and evaluation process. Many of our funded programs are here tonight, and getting United Way funding is really seen, not just in Missoula but elsewhere, as the good housekeeping seal of approval. But our donors increasingly are tired of giving to programs that do more to manage homelessness than to solve it. That's not to take away anything from the excellent work that these programs are doing, struggling every day with limited resources. But our donors want us to walk a little farther upstream and actually be part of the solution, not just managing it, but really crafting a solution to homelessness. And so I think I'm here because our United Way has a role to play in using our relationships and our resources and our volunteers and our voice and our visibility to really be part of a solution. And you can call me Pollyanna, but like the mayor, I'm feeling more hopeful than I have at any time, certainly in my tenure at United Way. But because last year 15% of our funding went to programs that directly serve homeless adults. And I'm not talking about sort of ancillary programs like the food bank that serve many people who are homeless, or the YWCA's shelter for victims of domestic violence and their families, but just to programs who are serving the people who were surveyed in Dr. Jacobson's survey. I think we can spend our money better than devoting 15% of our funding to those programs. So I guess that's why I'm here, and look forward to, I hope that we will come out of this meeting with a commitment to getting started on a plan. We don't do anything important in our lives randomly. We do it by planning. And I think that's what we need to do about homelessness. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susan. Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. From the, I guess, perspective of the county attorney, my interaction with the homeless largely comes down to the impact of very violent crime in our community. I suspect that many of you here either knew or knew of Forrest Salcido. You may or may not know of Johnny Belmaras. These are both victims of homicides in our community, and for all practical purposes, both of them were homeless. Forrest Salcido simply wanted to walk home for him, which was a borrowed garage, unheated garage that he was living in at the time, and needed to cross the California Street Bridge to get there, and ran into some people who thought that if he was going to cross the California Street Bridge, he had to share the 2 beers that he had managed to scrape together to just go home and kind of relax in this unheated garage for the night. And he didn't want to give up those beers, and he defended himself to the point where the guys that were trying to take it away from him basically got mad and stomped him to death. Because the community of Missoula had such a strong reaction against that, the attorneys who represented the people who were charged with this offense were successful in convincing, I guess to some degree, me and the courts that we needed to move the trial of this case to Havre. So Missoula essentially didn't even get to watch and sit in on that particular trial or hear much of what went on with respect to the last few minutes of Forrest Salcido's life. Johnny Belmaras, interestingly enough, was killed a half a block from where we're sitting right now. And he was killed on a night that this room was packed to overflowing and the streets were full of people. It was the night that the Missoula City Council was considering the anti-discrimination ordinance, and hundreds of Missoulians were here and outside this building, and less than 100 feet away, a homeless person was being beaten to death. And nobody really knew it. It just happened. Clearly, those are people at the extreme in the group of homeless people that Dr. Jacobson has identified. But they're important because they tell a story of the consequences of homelessness that is very important. People who are the weakest, youngest, oldest, most disabled are really the ones who the predators go after. It happens in the animal kingdom. It happens in human society, where people prey on these people. And maybe they don't kill them. Maybe all they do is rape them or assault them or steal what little they've got in their pocket to get by on. We, I think, have to care about how the weakest of our species is treated, because it says a tremendous about us as human beings as to what we really think is important in life and what we're willing to stand up for. Part of how we've gotten to where we are with the numbers that Dr. Jacobson describes is I think, the deliberate effort to sort of divide and conquer in our country as a whole. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. There are tremendous income disparities. The tax policy that we pursue, the entire political system has turned one against another. And people have got to stand up and say, this isn't America. This isn't what we really believe in. We can do better than this. And it's a combination of working both locally and together with other communities that have similar interests in terms of saying we want our society to do better.
I think we'll adjourn. That worked, Fred. Thanks. Chief.
I always get the tough acts to follow. My gosh. Besides, you stole like half of what I was going to say. Actually, Fred makes a very good point, particularly with regard to the vulnerability of the homeless. And in my line of work, as your chief of police, that's the one aspect that I can come here tonight and talk to you about, is victims and perpetrators of crime. And so it's dispelling to me to recognize that sadly there is a portion of the population of folks that Dr. Jacobson studied that are living exactly the life that they would consider to continue on. And it's not a number that's inconsistent with national studies. About 10% of the folks that were interviewed appear to be satisfied with the way their life is going. And I can tell you that that's a small percentage of the homeless folks that we coexist with here in Missoula. And just like it's a small percentage of the homeless who are perpetrators of crime, I would tell you that I believe that there is a larger percentage that are the victims of crime than they are perpetrators of crimes. A lot of the folks that we deal with on a regular basis are essentially what we would call frequent flyers. They are persistent petty offenders. And those folks do draw a tremendous amount of resources, there's no question, not unlike the connection that Mary Hutton has talked about with respect to the hospital. We can identify about 80 people that are very criminally active. Now, some folks will criticize law enforcement and the community with the idea that, well, those people wouldn't be criminalized or wouldn't be criminals if we didn't criminalize homelessness. And I would say that I think we've done a very balanced job of trying to address criminal issues that have direct impacts on other individuals, and a lot of it goes back to the the silver rule, because you can't replace the golden rule, but the silver rule is that one person's rights end where another person's rights begin. And I think that we've tried to take a very balanced approach to dealing with that here in Missoula, and I think we've been somewhat successful in that. But there are a number of things that sort of rise to the top there, and as Fred has pointed out, the violent crimes, both against homeless and by homeless, because we have just as frequently had these serious violent acts committed by other homeless individuals. A good many of the homicides that have been tied into homeless have been committed by other homeless individuals as well. So that's something that I think we do need to look at and address, and those people typically fall into this these chronic homelessness realms. Just like we have the chronic criminals, we have chronic homeless individuals, and a percentage of them that we have to work with. What gives me hope is to see just how many of those folks are interested in short or long-term housing, that they aren't just looking for the next night in the shelter or the next handout that comes from the food bank or from another service agency. And we are very lucky to have such a broad and dynamic partnerships around this community, and it's clear that it's recognized by a good number of these folks that are homeless that there are efforts being put out there, but there are impediments to them receiving some or all of these services that they are identifying. I suspect we would see slightly different numbers from this survey if it were conducted in the middle of the year, when I do believe that that's one aspect of this. I think this is a fabulous picture of our persistent homeless, the folks that are members of our community, and unless we reach out to help them, will always fall into this category. Something has got to change, and folks in this community that are better off than they are the only ones who can help make those changes. Many of these are not people that can make these changes for themselves. So I'm optimistic as well that the fact that the numbers aren't inconsistent with what other communities are experiencing around the country. Nationally, there's an estimated 12% of the homeless population that are unsheltered, meaning that they don't have a roof over their head. They live in places that are not considered habitable, and that they are chronically homeless, meaning that they've had at least 4 episodes 4 times during the preceding 3 years that they have been unable to have some sort of permanent or short-term shelter. So we aren't that far out of whack. We can, other cities have done better to improve it. We can as well.
Thanks, Chief. Mr. Ost.
I'm here. One of my jobs as the director of the Downtown Business Improvement District is to create a safe place for people to do business, a safe place for people to work and to live. And we got involved through an organization, I think we used to call it the Poverello Working Group, that ultimately became the Mayor's Downtown Advisory Group. The more engaged we got in that, trying to make it a better place to do business, dealing with some of the chronic homeless folks that we have downtown, we learned more and talked more to people that were involved in the process on a day-to-day basis, and have discovered that there probably isn't a silver bullet or anything like that that's going to solve it very easily, and that we have to have a conversation And if we're ever really, truly, I mean, we can remove folks from the downtown streets and sidewalks all we want, but someone will take their place, and we've got to provide an answer for folks to go. I was actually, someone brought up the visit from Paul Carlson, and he talked about Housing First programs that seem to be working in other communities. Most of those are larger communities than Missoula, and I do worry about where the money comes from on projects like this, but I do think the business community in downtown Missoula would love to find positive answers that create real solutions for people. That's primarily why I'm here. I do think that this is just a piece of the puzzle. This is not the first step, it's but one of the first steps that we need to take in order to understand it, talk about it, find solutions that work, find the money that helps make it work, and then implement.
Thank you, Rod. Mary Jane.
Representing Partnership Health Center, I came here from New York City in 2001, where I'd worked for almost 10 years with the homeless as a nurse. And I remember about 5 years ago, we estimated 600 people unduplicated would come to Partnership Health Center who met the definition of homeless. And someone in town said, "You'll never have that many homeless people in Missoula." And then that year we hit 600. Then the next year we hit 1,044. 1,352, and this year, 1,577. 2 years in a row, we have run out of money in the Healthcare for the Homeless grant, which I argued 4 years ago to take out of salaries and to put into a pot so we could actually pay for the care at the sliding fee to get a sense of how much it actually costs to take care of people. This year, I expanded to cover behavioral health services because I don't think you can take care of people's medical concern without addressing their addictions and their mental health issues. Two really significant things are missing in this community, which I have come to love: respite beds and permanent supportive housing. People who identify as homeless get cancer, have AIDS, are in liver failure, are in kidney failure, have multiple sclerosis, and every morning they beg our medical providers to choose them for the one respite bed in town. People die on the street, they die in the hospital, they die in the ER, and respite beds, 10 of them would make a dramatic difference in this community. My colleagues at the Poverello, who I have tremendous respect for, are in an almost untenable situation because the best way to move people is to move them through a shelter. All of those people that could pay $300 to $500 and $500 to $700 a month, that's a profit maker. Permanent supportive housing has been shown to be an excellent investment. People move, they pay what they can. The investors benefit from properties that are turned around. Businesses in the community are accessed by those folks, and it's really hard to have a shelter where people are like, "I'll go to Kalispell for 30 days and then I'll come back to the POV." When what the POV could be doing could be moving people into part-time jobs where they can pay what they can pay into permanent housing, instead of having a clinic team that we move from 6 hours a week to 30 hours a week, which I say to my executive director, Kim Manch, all the time. I could have people there 100 hours a week. They're making appointments. They're checking their blood sugar. They're trying to manage their blood pressure. These are people who want to be well. They don't want to be sick. They want to be well enough to work more than that half-time job. And if you have permanent supportive housing, you have a medical care team there, keeping people healthy, keeping them employed. You have a social worker, you have a mental health provider, and it becomes, it's just, people are already invisible, but they become invisible in the best possible way. They're like housed in your community, and the POV gets to welcome new people to town and help them move through. And the final thing I would say is, you can't have healthy people if you don't have stability. And if you can't get them through, we get people so close to health maintenance, and then they have to leave. And then they have to leave town. And when they come back, they've been off their psych meds, they've been off their insulin, they're in the ER, they get hospitalized, they're back at the POV begging for the respite bed. When you have people in permanent supportive housing, they eventually want to move out of that because they don't really want to talk to a caseworker every day. They don't want to talk to a nurse. And then you open up those beds, and then people at the POV get to identify folks ideal and move them through. So thank you for your time and all the good work all my neighbors do.
Thank you. Councilman Weiner.
I'm so glad that you got to speak because you have solution stories, and I'd love to come back here in 2 years and 5 years and have lots more solution stories, and I think probably everybody here would feel the same. And I think those solution stories can easily be made to happen. There's a lot of things that I've learned in the last, I guess, going on 4 years now. I didn't know hardly anything about this issue, poverty or homelessness, when I, ran for government. I ran because I wanted bike lanes, basically. But I represent downtown, and there's two groups of people in downtown that are very concerned about this. And one are, the people who are RODS ratepayers, the people who own property and businesses and work downtown, and all their aspirations are tied up in what it is. And the other are the people who live downtown. The district, Ward 1 includes one of the census tracts in Missoula County that has the lowest median income, where just massive numbers of people live below the poverty line. And those are people who, if they didn't show up in this survey, could be in it 3 years from now. And there's lots of people here who, have stable housing, but whose incomes are low enough that if they lost that, they might not know where they'd turn up next. And so all those people are, reasons for me to learn about this. And so I've looked elsewhere and seen what works. There's an article that I read years ago now called $1 Million Murray, which is famous, and probably many of the people in the room have read this, but it's about a guy named Murray who, he lived in Reno. People tallied up what was spent on his health care over the years that he lived on the streets there, and it was over $1 million. And for that, they got someone who, eventually died on the street. Well, if you're going to pour $1 million into somebody, the outcome should be better than they die on the street. And in our community, we are pouring millions of dollars into, people because they're being allowed to live on the margins. And so St. Pat's, says $3 million in charity care in 2009. That's 1,200 visits that produced that. Partnership Health Center has 5,600 visits, $628,000. Already you can begin to see that the more stable an environment somebody is being provided these services and the more cost effective they are, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck when people aren't just winding up at the emergency room day after day. We have a private ambulance service. In 8 months, they wrote off $120,000 in rides. And you can't attribute all of those to people necessarily who are homeless or precariously sheltered, but lots of them. The police and the fire regularly respond to those calls as well, so we're spending public dollars along with those private dollars that are being written off. There are hundreds of calls to the downtown area simply just for a police response. Margaret Borg, a former public defender, did a study. She found that 14 offenders who you describe as homeless have resulted in, I couldn't believe this number when I saw it, 2,600 days of jail time for misdemeanor offenses. And while they were serving, they incurred over $10,000 in medical expenses, let alone the per diem that it costs to keep somebody locked up. We could be putting them up in the Holiday Inn. So there's ways to spend the money that's being spent smarter than we're spending it right now. And that's important because we're losing our potential through this. There's a program called the McKinney Tutor Program where people can go into the schools and work with young people who are in precariously housed situations. And you've talked to those kids, they have some trouble dialing into what's going on in the classroom. And it's no surprise when you talk to them about what's going on outside the classroom. Well, we're losing we're losing the money that we're putting into educating those kids, and we're losing what they could be if they were getting everything possible out of what was being offered to them. So this is about, it's, I think, not just about them, the people who were studied, but it's about us. The other thing is that it's not just about sort of doing something more. It's also going to be very shortly about proving that we continue to deserve what we already have in order to provide these services to people. I appreciated Mr. Van Valkenburg's stirring lecture on fiscal and tax policy, and I'm always glad to talk about that. But the simple fact is public dollars are not becoming any easier to get, and that Congress has taken action in the past already to require communities to demonstrate that they are spending strategically and that they are evaluating for impact when it comes to federal money to do things like house people. And so we need to have a strategy in place and metrics that allow us to demonstrate the effectiveness of what we're doing if we're going to continue to provide even what we're doing right now. So, and it's also the right thing to do, spend strategically, evaluate for impact, and demonstrate the cost effectiveness. So that's, what I'm hoping we're back here talking about 2 years from now is how effective our strategy has been and how much more we are living up to the potential of our community because of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it would be appropriate for you to offer a round of applause for the panel and their really thoughtful notions. I appreciate that once again. And I am interested, and we are interested in hearing from you as well. So we're recording this meeting and broadcasting it, so I would ask that you, whether you like the camera or not, if you're able, step on up here and I will hand you a microphone. If you'd identify yourself, let us know what you think of the survey and any ideas you might have for us fixing the problem. Anybody? Sir, step right up.
After you heard about why I wouldn't do this, I was thinking we might get a birthday cake.
Sir, I'm going to have you come stand next to me, and I'm going to hand you a microphone so folks can hear you.
Okay, I'll go through this as fast as I can. I got a whole bunch of stuff to say and a lot more. And what I would wish that we could all stay here overnight and solve this problem, because this is what it's a solution. And I'm so excited to see all you people here, because not only is it about hope, it's about faith, but more than that, it's about love. You guys love, and that's the greatest there is. And George Washington, I think he would be very pleased with what you're doing here. He's not too happy with what's going on in our country, but you know what, Montana, we're great people. We have a lot of, whether you came here from California or not, and you're now a Montanan, you're here for a reason, and I think we can really band together and really do some awesome things to affect the rest of our country. I look at the ceiling here, and I've been a builder, and those trusses over there, they're put together with pieces. And this is what happens when you put the glue together, and we're all glued together, and we got support. And hopefully this is really a good one, because all the snow we've had. So, not to frighten you, but, if you start hearing something rumble, you better get out of here. Anyway, this is one of the best places in the world, and it was even National Geographic. I talked to a young lady one day and saying, I'm from Butte, Montana, and Butte used to be a beautiful place, but we, cut down all the trees and, put them in the ground to support the tunnels. And, and I'm a God guy, and this is a copper thing that a young lady gave me that I met at a dumpster. And I'm from Butte. This is a copper cross, and this guy here, he's a good example of what love is all about. Whether you believe in that, he's really a really good guy. But anyway, Butte electrified the country, the world, and we don't know if it's a good thing now with all the technology that's going on. But anyway, I see the picture of the bridge over here, and I think, we're building a bridge over troubled waters. We've got these troubles, but, we can rise up and we can solve them, And I'm sad about some of the things, and I'm doing this only because of God. I'm not kidding you. I couldn't do this otherwise. you know. And I'm not to say that I'm such a good guy because I served in Vietnam, but my dad served in World War II, and there's a lot of people here, that did the same thing. That you guys are giving your time and your life for the betterment of other people. I call myself a preventive maintenance engineer, because I'm like you, and that's what you people are trying to do. You're trying to prevent things, and that was mentioned here, that we have to prevent what's going on, and the only way we can do that is what I'm trying to do, and I've been doing this for 15 years, but not to the extent that I'm doing it now. And you people that have known me a little bit, because I have this little car with all kinds of stuff on it and the inside of it, and I got a truck that's full of stuff, and the idea is for us to come together and stop throwing all this stuff in a hole in the ground. I've got some mercury thermometer switch that I got out of a dumpster over here that we might address, by the way, to stop throwing all this construction waste. We have to have somebody overseeing that. There's another job, see? And you're not eliminating jobs at landfills. You're just adding to. You're just moving it around, see? And these books, here's how awesome God is. And now here, this is an example. This is the Statue of Liberty. This was in one of our dumpsters at one of our nonprofit places. This is not just a piece of plastic. This is a bronze Statue of Liberty. I don't know if it's made in China, but a lot of things are. American flags, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, it was in the dumpster, see? It's like America in the trash, And my mom, I thought to myself, because one day my mom said to me, "Bobby, you're a wasted man." And you know what? I am. You know why? Because I work with waste. I work with people, in other words, but the thing is, waste isn't waste until it's wasted, right? We just throw all this stuff away and it can be recycled. It's not waste anymore. I got more stuff in my pockets. I can pull out stuff. Here's just one thing. I picked this up out of the dumpster, and you can use this.
Bobby, I've seen your car. This could get to be a really long night.
Well, I'll hurry up. But so you can erase me. Anyway, here's a piece of wood that, on the outside, and this was probably from the Philippines. I think it's mahogany. But see, it was cut up. That wasn't like a chainsaw, But this comes out we got all kinds of stuff. We got teak, all kinds of stuff that comes in on these pallets and stuff that we can take and reuse. And now here's a friend of mine was part of the reason that they have this thing at the library. Most of you have probably taken advantage of it. And this is what I got today, just a few hours ago. I'm not kidding you. That's why I say it's a God thing. It just blows my mind. Nowhere to go. The tragic odyssey of the homeless mentally ill. But it's not just about the mentally ill. It's about the homeless. And there's the stuff that's in here, I could go on and on. Now, I grabbed this book because everybody likes polar bears, but it says sink or swim. But look what's inside here. And there's all kinds of other stuff I'd like to say here, too. But I'll end with this. See, here's one of the reasons God, besides that sink and swim deal, recycling, see? Look what happens. Maybe you've seen this in National Geographic. It's got a thing about these people in India and Africa, that these people take all our technical stuff, we ship all this stuff over there, and those poor people, they start a fire, which is toxic. There's a picture in the National Geographic of the kids walking through there, teenage kids, young kids, walking through there bare feet and all this toxic stuff. And that's what we do, is we can make jobs recycling this stuff and put people to work. And that's what we need. We have to have jobs, and we can do it. So let's do it, See this?
Get her done.
Get it done. I found this in the dumpster. I'm not kidding you, brand new.
I can't imagine that you would find a Larry the Cable Guy hat in a dumpster.
Yeah, I don't know, but don't tell him we found it there.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, we seem to have
We'll do that later. Please, sir.
My name's Glenn McCanna. I'm a former homeless person. And I've been in my own place for just about 3 years. And I'll tell you, the resources in Missoula are excellent because I use probably every one there is. And Missoula Housing Authority, and just even the hospital, the partnership clinic. And it's it's so revitalizing knowing that the resources are there for anybody and everybody. But the ones I talk to, they're afraid of the background checks, skipping on rental leases, and other stuff like that would hinder their abilities to get the housing or public assistance they need. And I think that with the assistance that we have, it needs to be broadened out to where some of them are not well educated and they need more stuff. I'm more of a listener than a reader. So if you have people in place to make it to where they have a better ability to get the resources, that would be a big plus. And the public housing of getting a more sustainable atmosphere for people to live in. There's a lot of guys I know that live on the river that say they won't even spend a night in the Poverello because of being around a lot of people. They're afraid of the confinement because some of them have been overseas in war, some have been in prison, and they don't want to be in crowds. And with more sustainable housing, it would be more reliable for them to come back and forth to get the ability to get housing, get Social Security if they need it, and other resources.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, very much. We're queuing up. That works, Councilman.
Oh, my name's John Wilkins. I'd like to talk about the veterans a little bit. I'm on city council here, and one Wednesday during our meetings, I went outside and an ambulance was there, and fire trucks were there, and this guy over by the bus thing was laying in the gutter. I went over to see what I could do, and one of his friends said, "Yeah, this guy's a veteran. In fact, Eddie was with the 4th Division." Well, that struck home because I was with the 4th Division. This guy could have had my back in Vietnam or something. Why is he laying in the gutter in Missoula, Montana? You know, we got an excellent place called the Valor House, but it could be expanded. It's too small. I keep hearing about veterans out there that are homeless, and I know they're right here in Missoula. You realize that this state, when it came to the Vietnam War, had more veterans than most states did? I don't know what the percentage is anymore, but it was up there. And here, now they're homeless. Here's another thing, and I think this is something we all can do tonight, tomorrow, and that's inform our legislative. Do you know that they're talking about cutting the funding for up at Columbia Falls for the veterans home? My God, I can't believe that they would even think of doing that. Here we're in a war right now. What, they going to do that to them poor guys coming back too? And the other thing is Missoula Aging Service. This keeps people from being homeless to start with, so we don't have to deal with the problem. What's our legislative doing? Cutting the funding. You know, these are important things that I think all Missoulians and should be all Montanans. So there's something we can do right now. And I'm so encouraged by this panel that I do think something good is going to come out of this. I like the idea that, now I forget what the doctor's name, that he was telling us about a place, I think that was in Seattle, and I think Jason touched on it, about a home for the really homeless people. I mean, the ones that won't look for shelter and stuff. And how that's worked out, and how in the long run it saved them tons of money, and especially at ERs and stuff. So, you know, I encourage $3 million. Gosh, if we could just like take $2 million of that and put it towards a home like that, you know, maybe we can accomplish something. And other businesses that are you know, I keep hearing downtown how, you know, the transits are chasing the businesses away. Well, maybe we all get together, and we have to also reach in our wallets a little bit, and we can solve that problem. I think we can, and I think this panel is a darn good start.
Thanks, John.
My name is Galen Calvert. I'm 84 in April, so I probably trump most of you on life experiences. I have recently moved up to be top of my game, I guess, because one of my fellows on the 9th floor of CFR Apartments is the mayor's mother. I have a peculiar problem here because I have something that I really want to give away. I'm incorporated as now ETI Incorporated. That stands for Energy Technology Innovation Incorporated. And I have been an inventor since 1971. I have a couple of patents here I could show you. One of them was replacement for the F-111 that flew at that time, and my drawings that are in this envelope here are identical to the one that after my patent ran out, it was patented again by Northrop Grumman. I called mine Cristo Dado, which I understood meant in Spanish Christ given, and they called theirs the Switchblade. But I have been blessed or cursed with inventive ideas for 30, 40 years now, most of them a few years ahead of their time. And I'm now, as I say, 84 in April, and I want to give this away. When I first saw this article in the paper, I thought this might be the time to possibly try to light a candle in the midst of a lot of darkness. I want to give this some ideas away here. I have correspondence here. I have to apologize. My computer crashed with evidence of correspondence to the papers. I've been was twice interviewed by Ian Marquand at the time. A couple other, and this got in the papers. I've been to the governor's office and put down to his technical advisor, who then put me down to another hardworking man who didn't have time for me, who put me down to one of his engineers, and then that engineer told me all I had was a replacement for a hybrid car, which hospitalized me, actually. I want to give this away. I have 50,000 shares of stock, less a few shares that my wife and I have. And by way of lighting this bit of candle in the darkness, I would like to give you fellows, you people, this august group, my email address, so you might contact me directly, and we could try to work something out. It just needs a little bit of work to, little legal work that Mr. Van Valkenburg could help us with, to sign a couple of non-disclosure agreements, and then the basis would be to give away about 49% of this during my lifetime, and the balance of it at my demise, which won't be more than 5 or 10 years yet. So that's the story. My email address is gecalvert@gmail.com. That's Calvert with a C, and would like to hear from any of you who might have a little engineering capability, because I'm not an engineer. I'm more like a scientist, but the detailed engineering is beyond me.
Galen, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Thank you very much, Galen. So what you just did is you'd offered resources in a room full of directors of nonprofits. It's sort of like throwing a bunny in shark-infested water, so be very careful on the rest of the evening. Thank you very much, Galen. Appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Todd Vaughn. I am currently a resident at the Share House, and some of you folks might be familiar with that organization, that program. When I came to Missoula, I was homeless. I was a practicing alcoholic. I ended up at St. Pat's and at Providence, made a change around in my life, utilized a bit of the services from Partnership Health, which is fantastic. I stayed at the Poverello Center for 5 weeks, put my name on the list to get down in the Share House. Have been working a program, have been in recovery. I guess the point that I want to make is that if there's a willingness in people and they decide to make the right choices, that there's a way out of that. It is nice to have the resources, and it can be kind of a hopeless situation. I was fortunate that I was accepted in the Share House. There's a lot of people that do not have that opportunity. Transitional housing. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a thing called the Oxford housing. It's a nationwide deal. It's an autonomous housing where it's pretty much self-sustained. The people that live there, they work, they divvy up chores. That's just one option for transitional housing. There's a lot of things that can be utilized that's not going to be cost ineffective. I think what people basically are looking for out there is a chance to just get in somewhere, get some stability, get a job, get themselves on their feet, take care of some wreckage, maybe some bills. I mean, how many of us really have good credit? You know, when we're coming up from that kind of a standpoint, it's hard to pass a background check, a credit check to get into a place. Nobody wants to be living out underneath the bridge. Nobody wants to be putting law enforcement, you know, through the grinder of having to run us in, things like that. Nobody wants that. I mean, you're going to have some individuals out there, and I don't know what the solution to that is, but that's just going to be. It is what it is. But there are people that legitimately want to make a difference in their lives, and nobody's looking for a handout. They just want a hand up. You know, that's what they want. And I have some good feeling about this panel. I mean, from what I've heard with you folks saying tonight, that you legitimately would like to make some differences, and that's what it takes. That's the first step in making a cohesive movement to have this done. So, anyway, thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Very much. All the way from next door.
Hi, I'm Jen Nave. I lived in Missoula for almost 14 years now, and I've watched Missoula change. I've watched the panhandling situation grow. I've watched the belligerent drunk situation grow. It saddens me. I love Missoula, and so it's really hard. I work next door at Sean Kelly's. Some of you might pop in there every once in a while. And as a waitress, I'm working my butt off every day, and it's really hard in this economic climate to make a decent living in the restaurant industry. Of all things, people aren't going out to eat. But then when people need to step over transients and drunks to get into those downtown establishments, when cigarettes are being put out in my customers' salads, when they're trying to eat outside in the summertime, it's hard. And it puts everybody in a bad light. And I know that that's a small percentage of our homeless situation, but it's making it all look bad. It's making it hard for people like me who used to be able to support the POV to donate as freely as I want to, because I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of it. my husband got me mace for Christmas this year because he worries about me leaving work. That's hard for me. That's not the Missoula that I knew. It might sound really naive or really facetious, I'm not sure, but if I were just traveling around the West and somebody said, you know, there's a real nice place for you in Missoula, I'd probably go to Missoula. And whether or not my problems were solved there or not is another issue, but that's where I'd end up. And so my concern is of that if you build it, they will come mentality. And I hate that because I want to support the people who need the support, but I don't want to support the guy from Portland who asked me for money outside my front door last summer. I think if this assessment were done at a different time of year, I think we'd see that a lot more than 56% are from out of state, out of Missoula. And we're talking about 44%, if I believe, are in Missoula. That's 56 who aren't Missoulians, who are coming here and using our resources. I'm so tired of calling 911. I'm so tired of my property taxes paying for that. And I'm just a waitress. I'm just trying to make it. So that's where I'm coming from as a citizen of Missoula, and I love Missoula, so let's make it work, hopefully.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, John.
Come on up.
Thanks. Hi, I thought I would build a house or buy a house or rent a nice house, and on my income, I decided I'd probably build a homeless shelter quicker than I could ever buy or rent a nice house on my income. And so I started mentioning it to people because there's a million people poking into my life because I'm funny looking. And somebody told me there was this nice gathering, and so I came to it. I've been thinking a lot about solutions and stuff, and one of the best ideas that came to mind was a homeless campground for families. See, because I have a son and I'm a single mom, and we've lost houses due to, you don't really fit in here, so we won't renew your lease. Your car is painted ugly, so I won't renew your lease. You did too many home improvements, so we thought you were unhappy, so we won't renew your lease. And then the last place, it was, well, it smells like gas here. Oh, look, your ceiling's caving in. Let's just haul you to the hospital, throw your son in Watson's, and condemn the place. And then I rented another one, and but I've been brainstorming, and I'm thinking that I know some nice properties are for sale. Somewhere along the way, I read about $800,000 grant that's going to vanish if it's not used for the homeless purpose. I don't know who that's through. I heard about Sister Mary Jo at the Family's Promise and a shelter that got opened in, Billings and in Helena recently. I don't know. I heard about the Salvation Army opened a homeless shelter in Coeur d'Alene last summer. There's at least 5 homeless shelters in Spokane. I'm thinking we've got the military, our fine military, gave me some clothes, some boots, so I didn't freeze to death this winter. We got a great military. The gear is solid. A few canvas tents could go a long way to keep homeless families warm if we just bought a little piece of property close to the bus lines where families could catch a bus to work or get to the doctor or whatever. When I'm not having a house, I'm terrified to be in Missoula lest I get discovered that I have a child and we don't have a house. I never lost my houses for not paying rent or anything. I always earned my deposits back. I was a great tenant. I'm funny looking. Sorry about that. I don't know why friends with big houses are so hesitant to help out, but I know one thing. It's illegal to let a friend go camp in your yard, so that makes it kind of hard. Why is it illegal to let a homeless family camp? And is it illegal, or am I wrong about that? Can we make a way? Because it costs a lot of money to build a house, and it costs a lot of money to build a shelter. And I think with the Red Cross and the military surplus, I think we can make a comprehensive campground. I know some properties that are for sale. I mean, I've seen them around. I don't know, so that's what I'm thinking. let's look at our camping laws and see if we can create a safe environment for families to go camping at. Someone mentioned the KOA. She works at the university and she's really smart, and I thought it was a great idea, but I guess they're making a lot of money. So we'll have to build our own KOA for the homeless families with their children in Missoula. That's about it. I just wanted to plug the idea for maybe a campground or some comprehensive laws so that I can come to Missoula and go to the dentist without fearing Watson's looking out for the part of my family they're willing. I don't know why we got Watson's but no family shelter. They'll take the kid but not the mommy. You know, it's tough. It's beautiful to get something for the whole family. Oh, let me just describe a few I met. Last fall I was still living on a river, and I met a family. There was 3 children and the man and the wife, and we were all fishing, and their 4-year-old had accidentally caught their rental house on fire, and it burned to the ground, and they didn't have renter's insurance, so that was one homeless family. I got another friend. Her 49-year-old husband died. Her landlady wanted to rent the place to a relative. They weren't even a month late on rent, and you know, now her daughter's in Watson's, and she's staying at the Poverello or not, or trying to get it together. It's really hard. These are nice people who paid their bills. They're just family people. You know, I try to keep my house nice. I have to rent some substandard housing and try to bring it up to decent by the sweat of my brow, and that's... I think if we could legally have a campground, that might be a good step rather than building a big thing. And it's too cold to camp in the winter, but you know what? The homeless families are kind of stuck doing it anyway, so maybe we could just make it kind of legal and safe. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we are taking notes as we move along here, folks. So we're approaching the 9 o'clock hour. Some of you have bedtimes and curfews. I recognize that. So I want to be respectful of that. But if you want to talk, I'll be here as long as you want to. So anyone else want to step up? You're more than welcome to. No? Nope. No. Thanks, Bobby. I'm going to let you have a chance. I'm going to let you have a chance at this after I'm done, all right? Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate your showing respect for the rest of the crew here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank the panel once again. Thank all of you for being here. The reason I'm interested in this, so we've heard tonight about financial costs. We've heard tonight about social costs. We've heard tonight about human costs. And I think there's also, from a community-wide standpoint, there is a spiritual cost to homelessness. Our ability to look after one another is one of those base measures of who we are, what we believe in, and what kind of a community we are. And you've heard that expressed more articulately than I have this evening. The fact of the matter is that I think each of us, were we in a position in our community where we were without shelter, without food, without medicine, without, in some cases, love, respect, dignity, we would, each of us, hope that someone would be paying some degree of attention to us, value us enough as human beings to demonstrate the kind of concern that we need to show for our community and our friends and neighbors and the folks who, depending on the day, could be any one of us at any time. So that's our opportunity here, is to care for one another and really make a difference. The fact that you all came here tonight, the fact that Maxine and her colleagues, volunteers, did such a fantastic job of sort of framing the issue for us in what I think is a bit of a new way, is just another sign of hope. The words you heard from these folks tonight, more signs of hope. Your suggestions this evening, your interest, more signs of hope. And I think the fact of the matter is that despite the fact that I generally have assigned this to Susan and Jason, despite the fact that I have no authority to assign them anything, we can come up with a plan. Other communities have done so. We can execute that plan. Other communities have done so. We can solve a problem. Other communities have done so. And I believe so much in this place that I have no doubt that working together, we can do that. This is a great first step. Thank you for taking the time this evening to think about these things. And I look forward to seeing all or more of you as we march down a path and try to figure this one out. Thank you again very much.